Hey guys, BuildZoid here, and today we're going to be going through the MSI Z590 motherboard lineup. I've already gone through the Z590 motherboard lineups for all the other manufacturers. There's a few boards that I've missed because not everybody had all of their boards up on their websites yet, but yeah, I've done Gigabyte, Asus, ASRock already, so MSI is the last, and that's going to be it for the Z590 manufacturers, because there's other motherboard manufacturers, but it's like EVGA has like 2 boards, so that's not really worth a video. And BioStar, I would just generally avoid. So yeah, that's kind of that. Anyway, MSI, let's get into it. Starting off with the Godlike because it's at the top of the page for Z590 boards. Um, so I do have a review. Well, I have like an I have an engineering sample of the board, and I'm not sure if they're going to give me a BIOS for it that's like supposed to make it work. But I really hope I get to test one of these because I've always been really I've been wondering how the VRM on these boards performs because it's all SMD polymer capacitors, and so it should be amazing. But yeah, I've never had a chance to test a Godlike with a probinator yet. So that's the main thing I'm interested in with the Godlike here. But as far as actually like being a motherboard people should buy, so I thought this thing was gonna be so my expectation was that the Godlike would be like $700. In reality, it's $1,000. At $700, I would have said it's like very hard to justify. At $1,000, it's like, uh, like if you think $1,000 motherboard is a reasonable purchase, there's not really much for me to tell you. Like, yeah. So, like, I think there's a lot of cool stuff MSI has done with it. I'm not sure, like, this weird plastic shroud thing that they have going on around the outer edges looks kind of dumb, in my opinion. But the board itself is really cool. It's just a real shame that it comes with a $1,000 price tag. And yeah, like the VRM on this thing is ridiculous overkill. Like, I'm not sure. Like, I'm kind of toying with the idea of doing a video with one of the like really high-end Z590 boards where I just run the board because I did this with Z490, but I didn't like the way it turned out, so it never went public. But yeah, like on Z490, I took a board and I ran it with no VRM heatsinks, just Prime 95, constant load for like over an hour. And the VRM, like, you know, it ended up running somewhere around 90 degrees, but that's perfectly fine for VRM components. Like, there's boards with heat sinks that run hotter than that. And so, yeah, so I'm kind of toying with the idea of doing like trying to do that again with Z590, just to demonstrate how insanely overkill some of the high-end boards are, and this is very much one of them, right? 20 amp. And the crazy thing about this VRM especially is that this is actually a 20-phase controller. Like, Renesas makes a new controller that I think only MSI is using that goes up to 20 phases, which is like, yeah, that controller's insane. So that's kind of interesting. And yeah, so you know, between the controller and then the capacitors that this VRM uses, it's like I really wonder how this does in terms of transient response. It's probably like there's a decent chance it's in the same level as like the Z490 Apex was and all the Z490 gigabyte and most of the Z490 gigabyte boards I tested, just because I maybe it's a smidge better. Because yeah, there's an upper limit to how good your voltage regulation can be, past which you can't really do anything because you have like there's a CPU socket in the way. Um, but yeah, so I hope I get a chance to test one of these. Even though this is a board that I don't understand why anybody would buy one. And it is absolutely loaded with features, but it's like $1,000 freaking. Like at that point, you could buy a $300 motherboard and buy like $200 add-in cards, and it would still work out cheaper. Like that's the thing. So yeah, like you get 2.5 gig, 10 gig. You get Thunderbolt 4 on the back with DisplayPort inputs for the Thunderbolt 4. So that's neat, you know. Wi-Fi 6E, but like a 10 gig add-in card is about $100, and I think you can get dual 10 gig for 100. And even if it wasn't 100, if it was $200, like you could still get, you know, like a $300 board and get your dual 10 gig for less than just having it built into the motherboard. So yeah, like this board is kind of like very hard to justify, in my opinion. Oh, and then it also comes with the like M.2 SSD adapter thing. So PCIe to M.2. But again, it's like you can just buy that separate. Those are admittedly kind of expensive, the PCIe to M.2 cards are. Now, my favorite feature with this board is actually that it comes with the tuning controller thing right there. And as far as I can tell, MSI hasn't included it with any of their other Z590 boards. Which is just like, are you kidding me? Why would you, like, most of the people who spend $1,000 on a motherboard don't know how to enable XMP. Like, ugh. Like, this is, like, I'm not saying they shouldn't have included it with this board. My problem is, like, why didn't you include it, like, with the Z590 Unify or a Z590 Ace? Because the Ace and the Unify are the same board. The Unify is just more cost-effective. Or like the ITX unit. Well, actually, the ITX board, you don't have the connector for it, but like, there's like a ton of other boards where I think that would have been, you know, a really cool extra sort of feature to have. And MSI is just like, no, we put it on the godlike. Like, this board is just like no serious overclocker is gonna buy this. It's got too many DIMM slots. Though speaking of the DIMM slots, what is neat, MSI is still doing their tabbed tab traces for the memory topology, and that works really well. Like, that's really flexible. At least on Z490, in my experience, it would work really well in both 2x16 and 4x8 configurations. So it's a really, like, from that perspective, it's a really cool flexible memory topology, and I like that about it. It's not too picky about what memory sticks you use. And like how many you use. So that's nice. And honestly, even for raw frequency, it does just fine. Like, compared to other, like actually, the issue for me testing raw frequency on Intel motherboards is my CPUs don't really go that high. So basically, all of my motherboards go to 4800, and none of them go past that because the memory controller on my 10900K and my 10700K basically goes, wait, you want to go more than, like, well, I can kind of do 4900, but both of my 10th gen chips basically go like, wait, you want to go over 4900? Yeah, how about no? Just no. We're not doing that. I actually have like a 5 gigahertz kit designed specifically for like Intel CPUs. And the only way I can get that kit to even post is like 1.7 volt system agent voltage. And I've only tried it on the Apex, and it's just like, so that's not okay. And it's not stable. It's not even remotely stable. It's just like, just to get into the operating system at 5 gigahertz. So anyway, yeah, so this board is like, it's $1,000. That's kind of, just kind of kills it for me. But hey, if you think that's a reasonable price to pay for a motherboard, this exists. It's not like they've done it, like, hardware-wise, they haven't done anything wrong with it. It's just like it costs too bloody much. Anyway, moving on to a far more reasonable motherboard, the Z590 Ace. Now, if you're looking at the Ace and think, oh, this looks cool, but you'd like it to be cheaper, wait for the Z590 Unify, because the Unify boards are basically Ace boards with some features removed. And if I had to guess, so actually, let's go to the gallery. So if I had to guess what the Unify is going to ditch, it's going to be the Thunderbolt. Maybe the Wi-Fi. Actually, I think they normally keep Wi-Fi on the Unifies. I can't remember. I don't really pay attention to that. But yeah, I'd guess they'd remove they'd ditch the Thunderbolt. You get to keep your 2.5 gig. What else would they ditch? Oh yeah, they'll ditch the RGB. Because like the whole thing with the Unify boards is like, oh, they're not RGB. Which is like, okay, whatever. Like, that really makes a difference to the manufacturing cost. So Yeah, but the Ace is cool because, you know, you've got your postcode, power button, reset button, and it does have the header for the tuning controller. Um, if you go into the manual, right? So you go into the English manual. Wait, that's not the. That's wait. What did I click on? Yeah, no, I want the English one. Um, scroll, 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 and actually we can just do tuning. So yeah, see, tuning controller connector. Like they have the connector. They implemented the whole damn thing. Oh wait, they give you the pinout for it? Oh cool. So maybe if you were you know, interested, you could probably build your own little tuning controller if you just get the right connector and then wire it up properly. Oh wait, no you wouldn't. Unless you figure out what like communication they're sending down that. So that's annoying. Like if it was just dumb buttons, then that would be really easy to work with. Oh wait, this is probably just for the postcode. So, yeah, you might be able to build your own little tuning controller if you wanted to. But like, so the board has it. And the thing is, they have other boards where they have just like the power and reset portion of the tuning controller implemented. And there it like makes sense not to include the actual tuning controller dongle thing. But on a board like this, where it's like you have the full connector, and they're just like, yeah, we're not including it in the package, and I'm like, but the board is like, it's not even cheap. Like, there's no reason. It's wait, that's not by Newegg, right? No, that's some random resale, random other store. Where's Newegg's listing for that board? Should have probably just go back to featured items. Okay, we're gonna have to reset it. MSI. Why does it keep going to this view? Okay. I think that's the Newegg listing, right? No, that's still not Newegg. Where's the shipped by Newegg? Sold by Newegg, there. So there's, yeah, so this is a $500 board. And it's like, you're not gonna, like, include the freaking controller. The header is right there. It's like the coolest feature of the entire freaking board. And it's like, nope, don't get that. No, I guess I must be like, I'm one of the very few people who think that controller dongle is really, really cool. Like, but it's just like, I don't think it would really, well, no, I still think like you should have the controller thing. Also, speaking of connectors, notice that 6-pin down there and how it's pointing straight up? Good luck plugging a GPU in above it. Also, I don't think that PCIe slot spacing is capable of SLI. Actually, did they even bother licensing SLI? That's always like, fun fact. Motherboard vendors have to license SLI from NVIDIA. So, like support, like having SLI support adds motherboard, it adds cost in the sense that you basically, like, you don't actually have to physically do anything to the board to support SLI. You just have to go to NVIDIA and go like, hey, can we enable SLI support on our motherboard? And they're like, yeah, just give us money. So apparently this supports two-way SLI. I'd love to, oh wait, but they can't fit 3090s on that. As far as I know, the 3090 bridge has like some super awkward PCIe slot spacing that doesn't work on 90% of boards. And this, yeah, this doesn't look like it's one of the boards where it would work. So, yeah, I'm really not sure what that extra 6-pin is for. Because you don't need it for 2 GPUs. And if you plugged in 3 GPUs where you're not plugging in that extra 6-pin down there, so good luck with that. Neat feature though, you do get 4 M.2 slots on this board, so that's kind of neat. You also have the troubleshooting LEDs up there. Looks like they have voltage read points as well. Actually, we could just check the manual for that. Maybe. Oh yeah, yeah, so they have voltage read points. No super deep. V checkpoints light. Yeah, bare minimum. That's why it's called light. I agree with that. But yeah, you do get some voltage checkpoints, so you know, they can be sometimes helpful. Anyway, what else is there? Right, VRM wise, it's a $500 Z590 board. If you expect the VRM to be inadequate, then like I don't know, like you must have been living under a rock. So yeah, 16 phases. And what controller is this on? It's on the 12 phase ISL 69269, and it is running a bunch of 6617As. Yeah, so it's running the intercell doublers. So it can actually run in 16 phase configuration. So this is actually like the same VRM they had on Z490. And this VRM works really, really well. Like it's a great VRM, the one they had on the Z490 Unify. So this is basically a Z490 Unify with a new chipset and some extra PCIe lanes and M.2 slots and RGB. Oh, and the Thunderbolt 4 in the back. And this is like this is a sensible board in my opinion. I mean, it is $500, but I consider this like for a high-end motherboard, this is a good feature set. Like this is kind of what I'd expect from a high-end board. I guess maybe having 10 gig instead. Well, it depends. I think most people probably don't care about having 10 gig. And if you do care about having 10 gig, there's other motherboards out there that you could consider instead. So yeah, this seems. Yeah, I don't see anything particularly wrong with this. Price seems okay for what it does. Like obviously if something was 50, everything can always be cheaper, right? Like if you lower the price, it makes it more attractive as a product just by default because it costs less, therefore it is better. But like you know, if you're looking to if it's within your budget to buy like a $500 motherboard, then this looks like a very good choice for a $500 motherboard. So that's kind of my thoughts on that one. Though I'd still say wait for them to really like if you kind of like the feature set, wait for the Z590 Unify because they're probably gonna like it should be coming relatively soon, and it'll probably do 90% of what the Ace does, except for like $400 instead of 500. So that is a far more reasonable motherboard instead. And we've got a Z590i Unify. Oh, they've put a fan into the VRM over there, which is totally reasonable on an ITX board. Actually, that's one thing MSI is doing on... Are they doing it on this one? They better not be doing it on this one. The Godlike has fans in the VRM heatsink, which is so completely stupid. Because it's just completely pointless. Like, why would you put fans in your heatsink for a 20-phase V-Core VRM? Like, it barely needs the heatsink. What's the fans for? I can't tell if this has fans. I don't think this has fans. Yeah, there's no... This better not have fans. Oh, wait, what did... Oh, you do get an 8-layer PCB, which is neat. It used to be that at $500 you'd only get 6, so you might... Actually, that should give you a somewhat better memory topology compared to the Z490 boards in this price range. So the memory overclocking should be better. It can also help with VRM thermals a little bit, just because the PCB acts as a better heatsink. Not that you should be relying on the PCB to be your heatsink, but with a VRM like this, honestly, it wouldn't really make a difference. Like, it doesn't really matter that much. Okay, I can't see anything about any fans, so I'm going to go with they didn't put fans in this VRM, which is the correct decision to make. On ITX boards, having fans in the VRM heatsink, in my opinion, is also totally reasonable because you just can't build... Like, the VRM can't be big enough, and you can't put a big enough heatsink on it in an ITX form factor and still get, like, reasonable thermals. Like, it's just too small. So the fan on this is totally reasonable. They actually managed to cram... Let's just go to the gallery there. Yeah, they've managed to cram quite a lot, actually a lot of I.O. on a board like this. You get a clear CMOS button, you get a bunch of USB ports, you get Thunderbolt 4 with DisplayPort inputs, and you get Wi-Fi 6E. Like, this is... Like, this is honestly okay, even for, like, an ATX board. Are they still doing the SMT DIMM slots? Yep, looks like they are. So memory overclocking on this thing should be very good. Actually, we should just check the specs that they have. 5600. I hope I get a chance to play with one of these. Though you're almost certainly going to need an 11th. Yeah, you're going to need an 11th gen CPU for that because 10th gen does not. Maybe if you binned a lot of 10th gen chips, but otherwise, hell no. Like, that is way too high for 10th gen under normal circumstances. And on the Ace, they also. So that's interesting. Because normally you'd expect the ITX board to be spec'd a bit higher on the memory overclocking because it has less DIMM slots. At the same time, this does have an 8-layer PCB, so maybe that they've managed to work that out, or they're like under-speccing one of them, or maybe the topology on this just isn't quite like. Because the thing is, just because like you can get ITX boards in sort of two variants of memory overclocking capability, really good or really bad. So I guess, you know, like it depends how much attention was put into the memory overclocking. And so if they put more effort into getting really solid memory overclocking support on the ATX boards, it wouldn't be too surprising if the ATX boards were actually on par with the ITX boards. But a lot of the time, like a good ITX board will just kind of outclock 4-DIMM ATX boards. So, or maybe there's just some kind of issue with going past 5600. Like, the next memory ratio that works might be like 5800, and that's a really big step. So, you know, that would kind of explain that away, because a lot of the time the difference between like a 4-DIMM motherboard, like a top-of-the-line 4-DIMM and a top-of-the-line 2-DIMM motherboard, you'd be looking at like, at least for like stable OCs, you're probably looking at like 100 megahertz difference. Not like, it's not that big, so it wouldn't necessarily show up in the spec sheet. Anyway, so that's the ITX Unify, and I gotta say, like, I'm impressed with what they managed to cram into the rear I/O on this. And in terms of the VRM, it's the same as what they had on the Z490. Yeah, so you're looking at 90 amp smart power stages, 8-phase V-core, ISL 69269 voltage controller. Yeah, like, this looks like a solid ITX board. Now, what are they pricing it at? $350. That's a bit high, but you do get the Thunderbolt built in, so it depends how the other ITX boards compare. But for, like, a high-end ITX board, this looks really good, in my opinion. So, yeah, that looks solid. Let's move on. Z590 Carbon EK. So this I'm okay with. I normally absolutely hate on monoblocks because they're like, especially the super expensive monoblocks. It's just like, the VRM doesn't need a water block. The chipset doesn't need a water block. The only thing on your entire board that actually needs that water block is your CPU. And you're probably better off just getting like a really, really good CPU block than paying extra for a block that like, it's not like it kind of cools your VR, like lowers your VRM and chipset temperature for no good reason. Like, Anyway, this on the other hand I think is reasonable because this is not a top-of-the-line board with an excessively expensive water block on it. Though it's not like the VRM on this is going to need that water block anyway, is it? Yeah, so this board 16 phases, 75 amps smart power stages. So this, like, so you hear 90 amp smart power stages, 75 amp smart power stages, you expect some huge current handling difference. In practice, not really. There really isn't that much of a difference. The nominal current spec is honestly, like, you're never gonna, like, it's basically irrelevant. There are certain scenarios where it actually matters, but under most circumstances, the difference between a 90 amp power stage and a 75 amp power stage is like, well, the number's bigger. Practically speaking, it doesn't make a difference. Anyway, but I think it's cool. Like, this makes sense in my opinion, just because it's like, you're not, like, paying as much extra for cooling your chipset for no reason. Is one way to look at it. Like, honestly, water blocks make a lot of sense if your VRM water cooling makes a lot of sense if your VRM is garbage. It doesn't make sense if you have a high-end VRM. So even on a board like this, it's like, it's still arguably not really doing anything, to water cool the VRM, but it's doing more than if you did the same thing on a Godlike, because on the Godlike, you know, it's like the VRM is going to run at like almost like that VRM is going to sit basically at the same temperature as whatever your ambient air temperature is inside your case, regardless of workload. Whereas here, the VRM might actually run 20 degrees above ambient. So, you know, the water block actually makes a difference for once. So, yeah, I'm not really a fan of having the flow indicator in there. Like, that's a really ugly flow indicator. Anyway, but I guess once it's spinning, it's not going to be very noticeable, unless it's spinning very slowly. Which is kind of the point. Like, that's the whole point of having it, right? To tell you if you have enough water flow. That rear I/O is packed. Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. So you get BIOS flashback, which is neat. Wi-Fi 6E, 2.5 gig LAN, 20 gigabit per second Type-C. So yeah, solid rear I/O. How many M.2 slots does this have? Because this kind of makes me think that it has... No, it has 3. It doesn't have 4, right? That looks like it has 3. Also, something worth noting with Z590 boards, that first M.2 slot only works if you have an 11th gen CPU, because that first M.2 slot, well, there might be some manufacturers that have a workaround for that, but under, like, if you don't go out of your way, if the board vendor doesn't go out of their way, that first M.2 slot requires an 11th gen CPU because there's extra PCIe lanes on 11th gen chips. Which is also the big reason why we went from why 11th jet, like why LGA 1200 exists, is that the CPUs now have slightly more PCIe lanes. An extra 4 for that first M.2 slot. So, yeah. Anyway, so that's the Carbon EKX. And then there's the regular Carbon, which is going to be significantly more significantly more cost effective, because it doesn't come with the water block. And instead you get... I love the look of this VRM heatsink. Like, that is a... Like, I really like the way this VRM heatsink looks. The rest of the board is kind of eh. You do get a postcode, which is nice, which you also got on the Carbon board, on the EK version. So, that's neat, that you get the overclocking, you know, support. Wait, does this have the J-dash connector again? Is this another one of those boards where it really should have come with a tuning controller? Oh, I keep... Man, like the first time it was at the top, this time it's at the bottom. Okay, so we do have that connector. Are you kidding me? Okay, so we have that connector, and... Oh, this is just the, like, 5-pin version. So yeah, this one isn't super useful. This one, so here it doesn't matter. But on the Ace, it does. On the Ace, they really should have included the tuning controller. So I like, how much are they charging for this? Because this just looks like a nice, solid, all-around motherboard. Right, how much VRM do you get? See, oh, I already read that off, didn't I? 16 phase for the EK version, and 16, of course, on this as well, for V-Core. So... Let's see. And where is it? $350. That seems like a reasonable price for a board that does all of this. I think there might be some boards that are more cost effective off the top of my head, but like this seems very... This might be one of the cheapest motherboards with a postcode. And it's also like, and unlike, there are other motherboards where I've been like, oh my god, it's a cheap board with a postcode, and then I got it, and it's like, oh, it's also got a 4-layer PCB, so while it'll tell you that your memory overclock doesn't work, it won't help you fix it, because the board just doesn't clock that high. But this is, like, this is a 6-layer PCB, So it's not going to clock as high as the Ace, but like 6-layer PCBs are still really strong. And around this price range, you're not going to see an 8-layer PCB. That's like 8-layer PCBs are basically $500 plus. So in this price range, this is going to like have very solid memory overclocking capabilities. But unlike a lot of the other motherboards in this price range, it's also going to have a postcode, which is really cool. Unless how much is I can't remember right now what the Z590E cost from Asus. That I think is the only board that would really compete with this on like if you like overclocking. And on that extent, I also do prefer like MSI's BIOS is like super easy to navigate. They do a really good job of organizing their BIOS, in my opinion, compared to basically everyone. It also helps that like MSI doesn't like rename options for no good reason. So yeah, I really like this board. I really, really like what they've done with it. Mostly with like postcode, freaking postcode. Finally, yes. And then of course you get a really solid VRM on it as well. Yeah, I'm not really seeing anything that it's like, oh, it's missing that. So yeah, like if you're into overclocking, this might be the board to get. And I'm saying might be because I still need to, like, I haven't done the comparisons. We're just doing MSI here, but yeah, when I get around to the comparisons, I would not be surprised if the Carbon ended up being like my go-to, I don't want to go out and buy like an Apex or a Dark or a Tachyon, but I do still want to do a bunch of overclocking, and I like RAM overclocking, so I kind of need a postcode, because without a postcode, life gets kind of... It can be, like, it does, especially on Intel platforms, that postcode can help you troubleshoot quite a few different issues. And so, yeah, for that scenario, that would be a great board. Now, the Z590 Gaming Force. This is a, like, purple version of the Carbon. I am happy to so I've been annoyed that motherboards are basically black for a while, but this is not an improvement. This right here is not what I was thinking when I was like, yeah, I wish motherboards had more color to them again. 'Cause these are the wrong colors if you ask me. For one thing, they're not orange. For another thing, yellow's just generally not a color that I like. Not a color I'm a fan of, but if you like the color scheme, you can get this. And I think this might be cheaper because it seems to be dropping. Yeah, this drops the Wi-Fi, doesn't it? Wait, let's just go to the gallery. Yeah, this drops the Wi-Fi, but other than that, it's the same rear I/O as the Carbon. And then it just looks really horrible. I don't know. Some people might actually like this color scheme. You do still get the postcode. How much is this supposed to cost? $330. That's even more reasonable. Man, why did they make it such an ugly color then? Because, like, yeah, I would totally go, like... I mean, ultimately, I'd still recommend it because it's like you get a freaking postcode at $330, but... Like, come on, guys. Like, it should have been orange. Or more like, actually, like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be orange. I just think the combination of, like, the purple and yellow just clash horribly. And they're both kind of, like, muted. It's not like they're really, like, basically, I don't like the color scheme. Like, as much as I like to joke about how RGB is ruining hardware, it's like, I do actually kind of care about, like, visual design. Not that much. Like, there's a certain taste I have in motherboards, right? Like, there's a reason I have certain boards in my collection where it's like, well, I have it because it was green. And this is one of those boards where it's like, this just, I'm not a fan of it. But hopefully, like, I think it's a cool idea, like, to have a board like that. It's just not my cup of tea in terms of the colors. Anyway, let's move on to the gaming edge. No postcode. They've got rid of that, which kind of sucks. Still the same VRM, I believe. Let's see. Well, the Gaming Force was the same VRM as the Carbon. Gaming Edge drops two phases from VCore. Yeah. Oh, and it also drops the doublers. Oh, actually, they all don't have doublers. I totally missed that. It's just like, yeah, the only board that runs doublers is the Unify and the Ace. So everything else is without doublers. So actually, these are 7-phase. Like this is a 7-phase VRM. Oh no, 8-phase. So you get 8-phase V-core, but you do get two 75 amp power stages in parallel. So, like the thing is the doublers allow you to do certain design adjustments that basically don't matter at the end of the day that much. Like if you're yeah, they don't really matter that much. Like the phase count is a means of achieving various performance targets, but there's other ways to achieve those exact same performance targets. Right? So there's many different ways to make a very good VRM. You don't have to always use doublers. You also don't always have to remove them. You also don't yeah. So anyway, so this is an 8-phase, not a 16. And 16 power stages, but about an 8-phase for V-core, which is completely fine. And this is a 7-phase for V-core with 14 power stages, so still completely fine. Slightly lower current handling capacity. Honestly, like barely, like going from 16 to 14 75 amp power stages is just like, it's not really making much of a difference at all. Like, yeah, that's less than a 10% decrease in power stage count. Like, it barely makes a difference. So the main difference with this board, in my opinion, is like, oh, it doesn't have the postcode. And then it does have a somewhat different VRM heatsink. You do still get troubleshooting LEDs, so it's not like you're completely in the dark, but the postcode does give you some extra information that the troubleshooting LEDs don't. We do still have the extra 6-pin power connector that's pointing in the wrong direction. I wonder if it's like, because there's like miners using these boards, in which case that can help protect the 24-pin if they're not using powered risers. But like, if you're mining, you should really be using powered risers. Anyway. Up to 5333, so yeah, this is going to be the same 6-layer PCB as the Carbon and the Gaming Force. 2.5 gig LAN again. So the main question with this board is like, how much is it going to cost? And also, what's the rear I/O like? Oh, you get BIOS flashback. That's nice. That's, you know, that's a feature that, like, under most circumstances you're probably not going to need it, but when you need it, you really need it. So it's like, it's a nice addition to have. Anyway, yeah, Wi-Fi 6E, 2.5 gig. I wish there was more USB ports in the back, but this is a okay number. Like, we're not at 6 yet. This is still 7 Type A's, so I'm okay with that. I don't count Type C's because the only thing that I have that can connect to a Type C is my phone. And even that, like, the cable it came with is Type A to Type C. It's not Type C to Type C, so. Anyway, yeah, so rear I/O looks solid, so the main question is, how much is that going to cost? And the answer to that question is, that's dumb. That's incredibly dumb. 330? Like, just get the Gaming Force instead. Like, what's the point? Am I missing something? Like, yeah, this has Wi-Fi, but like, and it is like, I guess Wi-Fi 6E modules are relatively expensive, but it's like, just get, like, if you don't need the Wi-Fi, just get the Gaming Force. Because the Gaming Force is just a better motherboard. Admittedly, I wonder if that's why the color scheme is so bad. Well, we need to somehow sell the gaming edge board, so just make the Force ugly. So, anyway, yeah, I don't think this one makes a bunch of sense. Unless they're planning to lower the price, because it's just like, the Gaming Force exists. The Gaming Force does more everything except Wi-Fi, which is like, okay, I like, again, okay, maybe you need Wi-Fi, but otherwise it's just like, yeah, get the Gaming Force instead. So, wait, is that is the Wi-Fi version, right? Yeah, that's the Wi-Fi version. So, I'm guessing the non-Wi-Fi version is significantly cheaper. Is there a non-Wi-Fi? Where is the non-Wi-Fi version? There isn't a non-Wi-Fi version. There's a Z590 Gaming Plus, which looks like the Edge without the Wi-Fi, so I'm guessing that's what's going on. Let's see. Gaming Edge, okay. Oh, they don't have a non-Wi-Fi Edge. Okay, so I guess Gaming Edge now just means gaming plus Wi-Fi. Okay. Anyway. So yeah, this is on another 7-phase V-core because there's no doublers, but 1470 amp, 75 amp smart power stages, so more than enough power capacity for any CPU that you can put in the socket. Like this is basically the similar VRM to what you had on like a Z490 Master. It's crazy how powerful VRMs are getting on boards. And this is gonna cost, where is it? No, that's the Tomahawk. Is this one not listed on Newegg yet? That would kind of suck. Yeah, apparently this one's not listed on Newegg yet. Where is that going to be? Because this is, I guess it's going to be 300 then, because the Tomahawk is 270. And it looks like they're going up in increments of 30. Yeah, so I'm guessing this is going to be 300. Solid VRM. I'm guessing like it's still going to be the same memory topology, so still going to go up to 5333. Three M.2 slots. Let's just take a look at the rear I/O. There's not really that much on a motherboard, right? Like it's just like a motherboard is basically a very fancy set of connectors. So yeah, like it's just a gaming Edge without the Wi-Fi. You get troubleshooting LEDs, dual 8 pins. Still get the stupid 6-pin down there. That doesn't make any bloody sense. Internal Type-C, which we've had on all the boards so far. Yeah, so I'm not seeing anything to be... And it looks like there's an LED off switch on the bottom edge. Let's check the manual for that. Oh, actually, speaking of LED off switch, if I remember correctly, I might have missed this on the Ace, but yeah, there's like a whole bunch of... I think this has dual BIOS, which is a feature I really like, and I should have pointed out, which, let's see. And we're going to have to use the manual again. Yeah, it has dual BIOS. So another reason to wait for the Unify. Because the Unify is probably going to keep that. I really hope the Unify gets to keep the dual BIOS functionality. Yeah, you get dual BIOS on this board, which is cool. I wonder if they kept that on any other boards. I don't think so. Like, we can just take a look if there's a switch. Like, there's a... Wait. I wanted to check... Which one is this? I'm pretty sure this is the Gaming Edge, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Gaming Edge. Or Gaming Plus, same thing. So there's a... Yeah, easy LED control switch. You can turn off the LEDs. Right? Where is it? No. This is not going to work. No, don't give me the freaking pings. Whatever. So, yeah, LED off switch, if you care about that. So you don't have to go into the software to disable the RGB. You can just turn it off on the motherboard, which I guess is kind of neat. Anyway, so it's the Gaming Edge Plus. Gaming Plus. Let's take a look at the Tomahawk. You get your troubleshooting LEDs, 3M.2 slots again. Now they're labeled. I actually like the look of this quite a lot. And yeah, LED off switch again. 6 SATA ports with 2 of them sticking straight up. You still have the extra, like the extra pointless 6-pin power connector on the bottom edge. It's kind of funny. Like there was a because MSI used to do this thing with the 6-pin for like ages and ages and ages. And then on the X570 Godlike, which actually supports quad GPU setups, for some reason, they didn't put an extra PCIe power connector. And then now we're back to MSI putting it on like every single board, except none of them support quad GPU. So it's like, guys, why is it here? Anyway, rear I/O looks okay. You get BIOS flashback, which I think is standard for the Tomahawk lineup. You get Wi-Fi. You get 2.5 gig LAN. Okay number of USB ports. Let's see what the memory specs are like. Up to 5333. So yep, that's the same as always. 6-layer PCB again. So, and this is going to be around $270. I think that's reasonable. What's the VRM like? 7 phases, 60 amp power stages instead of 75 amp power stages. So the 60s are actually, oh, and those are DR MOS components. So yeah, those should actually be noticeably warmer than the 75 amp smart power stages. But it like should still have absolutely no problem powering anything you want to run in the socket. It's just going to be like the VRM runs slightly warmer. Or maybe even significantly warmer, but basically as long as the VRM isn't going over like 100 degrees Celsius, it's fine. And the neat thing is with MSI board, like MSI actually implements proper VRM temperature sensors, which some motherboard vendors can't figure out how to do. I mean, it's not like they don't have temperature sensors; they have them. You just can't access through software. Can't access them with any software. So you know, they may as well not be there from. Like, until the VRM hits the over temperature protection and shuts down, that sensor is basically useless. But that's not an issue with MSI boards. So, yeah, this looks really solid. Now, the torpedo, I like even more. Because, like, this blue is cool. Like, if the Gaming Force was this color, I think it would have been way cooler. Yay, we finally get colorful motherboards again. Like, I'm a really big fan of this color. And I don't like, I generally don't like the color blue unless it's like some weird shade like this, which, yeah, big fan of this. This is cool. And then in terms of power delivery, I believe this is just a Tomahawk with different colors. Isn't it? Yup. 60 amp 60 amp DR MOS components, different manufacturer. That's very interesting. So, the Tomahawk is actually on Alpha and Omega semiconductor parts, whereas the Torpedo is on semiconductor parts. That's really weird. Though, admittedly, there are like electronics component supply shortages like for everything. So maybe that's part of it. Because a lot of the time you just see the same manufacturer for absolutely everything. And actually, like I've already heard about like certain power stages being like in short supply and that causing issues. So yeah, this is a Tomahawk with different power stages. I wonder if there's like a significant difference between the power stages in terms of performance. Let's just look them up. Because it's not like these videos have any structure to begin with, so it's like, okay, so this is the one on the Torpedo and up to 2 megahertz. That's neat. You don't see that very often. This looks almost like a smart power stage in terms of functionality. Wait, no, it doesn't. Yeah, wait, that's thermal warning, not. Yeah, okay, so this can tell the controller that, hey, I'm overheating, but it can't tell the controller the exact temperature, can it? Yeah. So it can tell the controller if it's overheating. It can't actually report a temperature back. Anyway, let's see if we have performance curves. We do have performance curves. Lovely. Okay, so we also need the alpha and omega semiconductor part for comparison, though, which I didn't. Come on, let me copy it, Google. Now, the issue is comparing different manufacturers. They're going to have slightly different measurement methods. Yeah, and they're not saying if they're including module output current. So I'm going to module power loss. Okay, so that's for the actual power stage, not the whole regulator. Because that's a difference that you sometimes run into. And it's super annoying when one manufacturer is like, oh yeah, we include inductor losses, and the other one's like, no. Because if they include inductor losses, depending on what inductor the motherboard is using, like it's kind of like, oh, well, this isn't exactly super accurate anymore. Oh, and these guys spec'd at 1 volt. These guys spec, it's 12 volts in output. What? Oh, 1 volt as well. Okay, cool. And that's 12 volts input, 250 kilohertz, and this is 500 and 300. Okay, so we should have a 500. Red line is 500, so like 20 amps. Because this is what? This is 14 power stages? Yeah, both of them are on 14 power stages. So if you're pushing 20 amps, that's 280 amps into the CPU, which is like the very possible to do with a 10900K or, you know, the upcoming 11th gen CPUs as well. So 280 amps is like a good point to look at, and that's under 2 watts. Like, actually, that's within the range of like you might be able to get away with no heatsink. Well, admittedly, that's at 1 volt, and do these guys have a voltage scaling curve? Would have been cool to have a module output voltage. Yeah, so normalized power loss. So if you were outputting like 1.5 volts, which you wouldn't, but well, okay, so let's say like 1.4. That's going to be right around there. So that's going to be 10% more heat. And this is like 1.8 watts, 1.9 watts. So, you know, you add 10% to that, it's going to be just over 2 watts. So that's going to be like right on the edge of being able to run that with no VRM heat sinks. So honestly, like this is a really, really strong VRM still. And then once you get to like 30 amps, which is 420 amps output combined. Yeah, which you're not going to hit. Okay, that's too high. So like 25 amps would be relevant to a real world application. You'd be looking at around 2.4 watts, then, you know, add 10% to that, like 2.6 maybe. And the heatsink should be more than capable of dealing with that. So yeah, that's no problem. Let's see what the alpha and omega parts do. These are somewhat more efficient. Yeah. Yeah, because at 25 amps, these are under, well, just over 2 watts instead of, or just under at 300 kilohertz, though I think that's about the same. Yeah, but that's at 250. So these are like ever so slightly more efficient by the looks of things, which I guess makes sense. Do we have a price for the torpedo? Oh, we don't. That's a shame. Not a fan of the name, though. Because I like to, you know, like I like using like torpedo as like 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 doing something torpedoes your performance. It's like you don't want your motherboard to do that. But this looks like a really solid board. Just the name is a bit like maybe kind of unfortunate. Then again, MSI's also had motherboards called like I'm pretty sure they had a motherboard which was called the Grenade, which is like, yeah, you really don't want your motherboard doing that. So, what's the rear I/O like? Oh, so this has dual LAN. So yeah, like this. That's an interesting feature for some people. For the vast majority of people, it's like, who cares? For some people, that might be very useful. And since there's dual LAN, I wonder who makes it. So you have dual Intel, neat. So this is going to be on Intel as well. And the difference between the Torpedo and the Tomahawk is like this has Wi-Fi and single LAN, whereas, you know, this has dual LAN and no Wi-Fi. So Yeah, both look extremely solid. Like both look like extremely solid boards. So anyway, that just leaves the Z590 Pro Wi-Fi and the Z590 A Pro. Um, is it just like does basically everybody has a Pro motherboard, don't they? Yeah, Gigabyte has a Z590 Pro. ASRock has a. I'm not sure that they have a Z590 Pro 4, but they definitely had Pro 4s in the past. And then Asus. I think Asus also uses the Pro name. They definitely used it in the past. So this word is like super inconvenient, like completely useless for identifying who your manufacturer is because everybody uses it. Um, anyway, those are some very stealthy heat sinks because I'm pretty. If we get a better angle, yeah, because they're hiding all of the actual surface. Well, that's not really much surface area to. It's not much surface area they're hiding back there. Um, but like to be fair, like that is still like just the fact that you have this massive fin going all the way up over the rear IO that has quite a bit of surface area on its own. And then this rear heatsink actually has decent surface area that you just don't see from a head-on view. Um, in terms of power delivery on this, 12 power stages, 6-phase, in parallel, of course, rich tech voltage controllers now instead of Renesas or, well, Intersil. Um, well, Renesas owns Intersil, so it's like the same damn thing. Anyway, 55 amp DRMOS components from Alpha and Omega Semiconductor. So that should still be more than like that should still be plenty powerful. Yeah, this should still be plenty. What output voltage? Oh yeah, that's 1.8 volts. So this is here's 1 volt. So that's more relevant to us. Why did like why does nobody use the same frequency ranges? It's like so the previous one was 300 kilohertz and 500 kilohertz, and now this one's 600 and 750. That's not even that big a gap. Anyway, so 12 volts input, let's say 600 kilohertz because that's more realistic. A little over 2 watts at 20 amps, which would give you 240 amps combined. And at 25 amps, it's around 3 watts. And then there's obviously going to be some voltage scaling on top of that, but you know, so that's like 36 watts for the whole VRM if you're outputting 360 amps. All right, now I'm doing the math wrong. 20 times 12 is 240, and then 1/4 of that. So 300. Yeah, so 300 amps. So this might run kind of warm. But it should, like, with the heat sinks it has, it should still be fine. Yeah, this should still be completely fine because they are splitting up the heat between the two VRM heat sinks, and also, like, if you actually have it in a case with airflow, that's going to help a lot. What's the rear IO like? Good solid number of USB ports. Looks like you still get BIOS flashback, which is nice to see because there's some manufacturers where their low-end boards, they'll ditch the BIOS flashback, and then it's like, well, I mean, again, it's one of those features where it's like, until you need it, well, when you need it, you really need it. So it's nice to see that still be present on a board like this, especially because that's going to be, oh, it's actually kind of expensive. Yeah, like that's 220. It's not really that cheap. I mean, that's the wrong board. I mean, it does have Wi-Fi, so What's the specs like? I mean, this is still going to have, yeah, same memory support because it still has a 6-layer PCB. Then you've got troubleshooting LEDs up here. So, I don't know. I think this is probably my least favorite board in MSI's lineup. Like, even considering what price range it's targeting, like, I'm not sure that I particularly like what they've done here. Like, the VRM's fine, though I think at this price range you can get better from either Asus or Gigabyte. And like the troubleshooting LEDs aren't a benefit. Gigabyte has BIOS flashback in this price range. I mean, Gigabyte has BIOS flashback all the way to the bottom of their lineup, so that's kind of like with Gigabyte, does it have BIOS flashback is more of a question, is like, is it made by Gigabyte? Then yes, it has BIOS flashback these days. So yeah, I'm not really sure that I'm a big fan of this. It might, they might lower the prices eventually, because that's another thing that tends to happen is like boards release, and then depending on how things work out, that some boards get price cuts, some don't. Like there's a lot of Asus boards that tend to release at really high prices and then they get slashed. So yeah, MSI might do the same here. Or maybe the other boards will be like, or there'll be supply issues from other boards, and so like the current like pre-order prices are going to be completely irrelevant soon enough. Then again, it depends if 11th gen is actually any good, doesn't it? I'm actually, let's just check the manual. Oh, they don't have just a regular English one? Or is this like, oh, this one's really long. Okay, so we should still get the, yeah, this is the most useful page in any motherboard manual. Yeah, so I didn't miss anything. You get your 3 M.2 slots, your very pointless PCIe power connector. I need to stop. Who cares? But yeah, that's kind of it. Don't really, yeah, I'm not really seeing anything that's like that really stands out to me with this board. And then of course you have the dash, like regular A Pro, which doesn't have the Wi-Fi. That's it. Which is actually, yeah, so that one's like significantly more reasonable because that's $190 instead of $220. I just like the thing is, I'm guessing it's on Wi-Fi 6. It better be on Wi-Fi 6E. Like this better be on Wi-Fi 6E. Oh yeah, it is on 6E. Okay, then it makes sense because the 6E modules are more expensive than the regular, like than the Wi-Fi 6 or the Wi-Fi 5 modules. So yeah, it makes perfect sense that, if you have a Wi-Fi 6E module on a board like this, that it's going to be 220. And you do still also get 2.5 gig Intel LAN. So yeah, it's kind of that for this board. And by now I think the Intel, like, so something worth well, so from what I've heard, because I don't have a 2.5 gig switch. Actually, I just straight up don't plug in the LAN on most of the motherboards I use for like most of the well, actually, yeah, like the motherboards I use for benchmarking, I just don't hook them up to the internet because like I don't need Windows updates. And I transfer all the scores via USB stick, so it's just like, yeah, they don't need to be connected to the internet. But apparently the early 2.5 gig LAN from Intel had some major issues, which is why MSI for the Z490 launch didn't use it. So since MSI is now using it, I guess they fixed it. Because like MSI told me that, yeah, we're not using Intel's 2.5 gig because it's like completely broken. And there was like news pieces about how like Intel had to like rush out fixes for their 2.5 gig LAN, and I don't know how that worked out because again, I've never Like, I do have boards with Intel 2.5 gig line. I've just never plugged it in, so... And I also don't have a 2.5 gig switch, so I'm not sure... Like, I'm not sure if that issue shows up on 1 gig. Then anyway, like, MSI is now using it, so... On everything. So I guess it got fixed. Yeah. So... I kind of wish we had a... I'm going to actually, based on the fact that this has 1 gig and 2.5 gig, and this has 2.5 gig and Wi-Fi, I'm going to guess these are both the same price. Because otherwise it doesn't make... Like, because this one adds stuff that this one's missing. And, you know, like, there's a feature trade there. So, anyway, I mean, I really like the Carbon. Actually, no, I really like the Gaming Force if it weren't for the freaking color scheme. But the Gaming Force, like, if you're into overclocking and you don't need Wi-Fi, that looks like a really, really solid option. Other than that, like, the lower price ranges, I'm not sure. I'm going to have to do some comparisons between the other boards, but it looks like very, very even this time around. And actually, Z490 was very similar, where there was just, like, a lot of motherboards, and kind of B550 as well. Like, the issue is, in my opinion, is that at this point, basically all of the motherboard vendors are aware of my channel. And my list of criteria that I score against isn't really that long or that complicated. So basically... building a motherboard where I'm like, yeah, this is a solid motherboard and the price is reasonable is like not actually that hard. And so for like Z490, it was like, whoa, there's a lot of motherboards that are like $10 apart in price that do basically the exact same things from like 3 of the vendors, because for Z490, ASRock decided that they couldn't be bothered. Yeah, like between MSI and Gigabyte Asus, Z490 was like, they're all so similar, just like whoever BIOS you like the best. And I think Z590 is going to end up being very, very similar, though I think maybe MSI is going to have a bit of a power delivery edge, because that is a lot of 75 amp smart power stages that they have in their lineup. And yeah. And all, like, the thing is, off the top of my head, I don't remember all the VRMs for the different price points for the various manufacturers, but, yeah. So with MSI, it's basically wait for the Z590 Unify, and then Gaming Force if you're into overclocking. And then the rest of them is kind of like, it depends. But I'm not seeing anything that, like, I'm not seeing any boards that is like, oh, you should just straight up avoid this. It's been a while since we had a motherboard where it was like, you should just straight up avoid this. And I'm not even saying, well, there's always ASRock and BioStar. They're not on the same level, though. Like, ASRock does produce good boards. I'm not sure BioStar ever has. So, yeah. So, like, yeah. But for Z590, like, so far, I've not yet seen a board where it's like, oh, you should just avoid this. From the manufacturers that I've checked. Actually, no, I think it was ASRock boards. But, yeah, you know, like, that's a given. But yeah, for, like, MSI Gigabyte Asus, can't think of anything that was particularly terrible. So... yeah, that's it for this video. Thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe, leave any comments, questions, suggestions down in the comment section below. If you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking, I have a Patreon. There's a link to that down in the description below. There's also the AHOC Teespring store where you can pick up shirts, stickers, posters, you know, the usual YouTuber merch. And yeah, both the Patreon and Teespring help out immensely with running the channel, so it would be much appreciated if you check those links out. And that's it for the video, so thanks for watching, and goodbye.